All right, guys, so today we're going to be working in lesson 11. So go ahead and click on enter here. Of course, we're going to still be working in unit 1 as we have been. And you're going to head all the way down to lesson 11. Our goal statement for today is I can infer the characteristics and movements of an air mass. Go ahead and click on lesson. So our warm-up is going to be a discussion question. Go ahead and just stay here for just a second, and we're going to head over to the PowerPoint. So lesson 11 is about air masses. Last class, we covered a little bit more about air pressure and what kind of weather different air pressures bring. Now we're going to talk about air masses. Our essential question today are what are the different types of air masses and what type of weather is associated with each air mass? So what connections can you make with these pictures? In your discussion, you're going to talk about this. If you remember from last class, we saw these big L's and big H's and what they meant. You can also infer from what you saw the other day about the H's and the color of them, what kind of weather these pictures will bring. So air masses, as you watch the video, define the following terms in your notebook. You guys can just kind of think about what these terms mean as you're watching the video, which you guys will have to do on your own time. So what are air masses? Air masses are large bodies of air. They form when air over a large region sits in one place for many days. The air gradually takes on the characteristics of the land or water below it. We'll talk about more about what that means. And then how do air masses affect our weather? So they move with the global wind pattern. So remember our global winds were the easterlies, the westerlies, the trade winds, and we talked a little bit about the doldrums as well. As an air mass moves, it brings its characteristics with it. So if it's a polar air mass, it's going to bring cold air. And it can even change our weather. So we kind of define it in two ways. The first one is temperature, and the second is humidity. We're going to go back to temperature here for just a second. So we either define it as polar or tropical. Polar being cold and tropical being hot. Or humidity. So we call it maritime or continental. So when we talk about temperature, you're either going to call it tropical or you're going to call it polar, depending on where it's at. So tropical is going to be located near the equator, and polar is going to be located towards the poles, hence polar. Tropical is obviously going to be warmer, and polar is going to bring colder air. So tropical warmer air, polar colder air. Then these two words describe humidity. We have maritime and we have continental. So our continental air mass is going to be formed over the land, just like a continent. So it's going to be formed over the land. While our maritime, so this is our continental, formed on the continent, and then our maritime is going to be formed over water. So mary means sea or pool. So our maritime is going to be either kind of humid, wet, moist, whatever word you want to use to describe. Maritime means like wet or moist. So maritime versus continental. Our land is dry with continental and our oceans are wet, which is maritime. So in order to figure out what kind of air mass we have, they kind of stick them together. So CP means continental polar. So continental means it's over the land and polar means cold. So it's going to kind of be a cold air mass over the land. Then we have maritime polar air masses. So maritime, remember, means kind of wet or very humid or moist, and then polar is cold, so it's going to be a cold and wet air mass. Then we have our continental tropical. So continental means over the land and tropical means warm, so it's going to be a very warm and dry air mass. And then the last one we put together is maritime and tropical. So maritime is again kind of wet and moist, so we have our warm and wet air mass. So this is kind of helpful to see this map to where there's different air masses. So maritime polar, because up here is so far away from the equator and it's over water. And then down here we have our maritime tropical. So maritime means it's over the water. Tropical means it's warm and closer to the equator. So these are our 4 main types of air masses. This will help you complete the worksheet that you are going to do for today. And so what are the 2 characteristics of an air mass that you need to know to classify it? So it's temperature and its humidity. So it's temperature, whether it's cold or polar or tropical, so cold or warm. And then it's humidity. So whether it's maritime, which means it's over the water, or continental, which means it's over the land. So we're going to head back to our Canvas page. If you click on Next, you have your warm-up discussion to do. So you're just going to click on Reply, go ahead and hit Next. Here's the teacher PowerPoint. So the PowerPoint I just shared with you guys, that will be linked in here in case you need it. Go ahead and click on Next. And this is classifying air masses. So you're going to remember if it's closer to the equator, it will be tropical. If it's further away, it will be polar. If the air mass is over the water, it will be maritime. And if the air mass is over land, it'll be continental. So I'm going to go ahead and share with you what this looks like. When you're finished, you'll just submit this worksheet. So this is your only assignment for today since we had the quiz earlier in class. So all the letters represent where on the map it is. So I did A for you. So letter A is right here. Remember, the equator is right about here, right in the middle. All right. So A is warm because it's close to the equator. So the temperature, they said warm or cold, it's warm. Our moisture is moist because it's over the ocean. So when we have a warm, that means it's tropical. And whenever we have it's moist or wet over the water, that means it's maritime. So that means this air mass would be a maritime tropical air mass. So you're going to continue to do the same thing. So B is closer to the poles, which means it's going to be polar. And then B is also on the land, so it's going to be continental. So then we'll end up having a continental polar air mass. So you're going to continue to do that all the way through J. Just make sure you head back to Canvas and make sure you turn it in and click Submit, and you will be done for today.